Second. What is up, guys? Teddy Cornwell here. Welcome to the Underdog Talk. And there's something about the underdog, but today on this episode, I am thrilled, happy, honored, and I want to give a little introduction to this guest. You see to the right of me, I'm joined by a relationship coach, teacher, podcaster as well, writer, and speaker who has devoted her life to helping people revolutionize their relationships and just has changed the game as we know it. She's been in the game for 20 years. That is just insane to me. And all she's done has been so impactful on everyone in so many different walks of life. I'm proud, honored, the one and only Miss Jillian Turecki. How are you doing today, ma'am? And how's this wonderful Friday for you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And I feel very honored to be here. And yeah, I'm excited for our conversation.
And I was telling Jillian Underdog Talk off camera that I have a confession. I'm hooked on a podcast, and it is not the Underdog Talk. I don't know if it's a bad thing, but I think it's good to go to different scopes. And obviously, I'm talking about Jillian's podcast, Jillian I Love, which as I mentioned in the intro, has helped so many people in relationships and finding themselves, and myself included. Now, Jillian, have you ever actually listened to your own podcast?
I have.
Okay.
I have, especially when we launched a couple of years ago, I was listening a lot because I wanted to, I was listening more with like a, critical ear. I wanted to listen to my cadence. I wanted to pick up on any like weird, like, habits, verbal habits that I have and whatnot. And sometimes I just want to listen to see like, does this land? Is this good? But I have to admit, I haven't listened to the last few.
Well, we're great. I'll be the first person to tell you. And I do the same thing sometimes in my podcast. I take notes, say, how could I deliver that better to the guest? How could I have come up with a better question? I think that's, just makes a good podcaster, I guess you could say. And now, Jillian, I kind of want to take it back a little. Obviously, you've been in the space for 20 years. Would you mind talking a little bit about yourself? How did you get into this specific industry / career? What was like the path getting to where you are now? What was that all like, Jillian?
Yeah, well, so I started off many, over 20 years ago, teaching yoga. And yeah, and I worked a lot with individuals and couples and families. And the kind of yoga that I taught was really helping people really to completely transform the relationship that they have with their bodies and with their lives and with themselves. A lot of pain management, a lot of people wanting to reduce stress and just to generally feel better. And it was really interesting working with couples and working with families. And a lot of people would open up to me because, it's a very intimate thing. I'm dealing with, we carry most of our emotions in our bodies. And so dealing with that and helping people with that was really profound. And, everyone who walks into a yoga studio is searching in some way to better the quality of their lives. And then, I always wanted to do more with it, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And this was also around the same time that I also wanted to get married and have a family. And so I was in a little bit of like an existential crisis where I just didn't know what my future held for me. And I wanted more, but I didn't know what it was. And I was having a hard time envisioning my life. And I didn't really have the skills that I have now about goal setting and about, making things happen for me in my world. And then I went through some tragedy. I got married, and that marriage was very difficult and ended very abruptly and was very painful. I went through a miscarriage. My mom died. And so I really entered a intense, dark night of the soul. And it was truly this feeling like my life is falling apart. And I honestly didn't know how I was going to get myself out of it. But, I started working with some coaches, and I started adopting some of the, I started listening to certain people and following certain people's work. And it was just really profound. And I really became obsessed, literally obsessed with what makes a relationship work, because I could not understand why my relationship didn't work. And it was very, very painful for me. And I went on a mission to figure it out. And I gained so much insight. And I was like, this is it. I have to help people with their relationships, specifically their romantic relationships. And it all boils down to the relationship that you have with yourself. And so when I entered the space of coaching more, from just teaching yoga into coaching, that was over 10 years ago. And so I've been obsessed with this ever since. And I incorporate all my knowledge of the body and the mind into all of that. And so, so here we are, a little over 21 years later of me working with people and their relationship with themselves.
And it's funny how everything kind of happens for that reason. And I've learned on this podcast, this is the Underdog Talk podcast, something about the underdog, because the underdogs are always the hungriest. And I guess from rock bottom, there is only one place that is up. And Jillian, I am so thrilled to hear about your journey and how, you've inspired so many because of, your things that you dealt with, like every other human being. And I would love to, I was going to ask many more questions about how you got to where you are, but you are such a successful individual. I want to jump into the, the juicy stuff. And obviously, as I mentioned, I've been listening to your podcast on repeat. And, I do have to ask, is there a specific question that, or the most delivered question to you about relationships? What would that be? The one that you hear all the time.
So I wouldn't say I would say there's a few of like the top, 5, whatever, questions that I get. One would be like, how do you move on from heartbreak? Like, how do you get over a breakup? Another one is, how do I communicate with my spouse or my partner? Like, how do I communicate more effectively? And then another one is, how do I love myself? And I would say another one is, how do I date? Like, what am I doing wrong? How do I heal? How do I heal so that I can pick better partners and be a better person in a relationship? Those are like the top ones.
And, I think my big question would, that if I were to ask you would be, how do I struggle? I mean, how do I go forward with my baggage? And obviously in your podcast, you talk about how you can get baggage from relationships, how we all just kind of have that baggage in life. I'm scared of rejection going into a new relationship with that baggage. And you talk about baggage so beautifully on, your podcast. Would you mind describing, for those who are not familiar with the term baggage, what baggage is in a relationship?
Yeah. So we all have a past, and everyone has a childhood. And some people, not all, some people had a very difficult childhood, and maybe some trauma there with one or both parents. And some people, even if they wouldn't regard it as serious trauma, maybe they were raised in a family where there wasn't where their parents didn't get along, maybe there was divorce, right? So as a result, we form these beliefs about life, about love, about men, about women, about ourselves, based on our experiences. And that's called our conditioning. And then we also have conditioning from society. We have conditioning from our peers. We have conditioning from former relationships. So someone could have a pretty good childhood, but then go through something very traumatic in a romantic relationship later in life. And that scares the hell out of them, honestly. And then they start to build these sort of beliefs and these fears that make it so that they really struggle in relationships. They struggle to open up. They struggle to be present. They struggle with closeness. They struggle with the fear of being abandoned. And so we go into relationships with this sort of heaviness that we're carrying on our backs, right? So therefore our baggage. And part of our responsibility is to, if we want to have great relationships, is to kind of take a look at that baggage and try to heal from it. It doesn't mean that it's going to take the memory of it away, but we have to learn new ways of coping, right? In other words, because so many of us, what will happen is that, well, not so many of us, all of us will have particular coping mechanisms. And oftentimes those coping mechanisms are what sabotage our chances of having a healthy relationship with another person. And so we need to take it upon ourselves to kind of really look at those beliefs and those conditionings. Some people choose to do that in therapy. Other people choose to do it in other ways, and just say, you know what, like, I want to learn new ways of being. Like, I want to learn how to communicate. I don't want to do that thing. Like, every time there's a confrontation, I don't want to do that thing where I shut down. Or every time I perceive a confrontation, I don't want to do that thing where I'm like, having to communicate about it like morning, noon, and night, So we all do these things. We all have these habits, these adaptive habits that were developed as a result of our past experiences. And when we've had difficult past experiences, then the more adaptive we are, the more we adopt these adaptive habits that no longer serve us. And so, long story medium, at the end of the day, it's really about saying, the common denominator in all our relationships is us. We are the common denominator. And so that means that more times than not, the person, place, or thing that's standing in the way between where we are and what it is that we want, let's say like a healthy relationship, is ourselves. And so people who enter relationships with this baggage that they haven't looked at, that they haven't worked on, that they're not aware of, that they're not like working through, those are the people who are less than ideal to be in a relationship with. And so my job is to help people to heal from that, to just be aware of it, to raise their level of self-awareness and consciousness, and to be more mature and to function better in relationships.
And obviously, some, like you mentioned, some baggage comes from past relationships. And in one of your podcasts, what really opened my eyes was you kind of use this phrase. You said a healed person is someone who has wounds, but kind of has become a better version of themselves. In fact, you used it. You said someone who is more whole. And in fact, you also talk about how it's actually good to heal with someone else as well.
Yeah.
Talking about more that concept of healing with someone, and how that is an appropriate mechanism for kind of getting over that baggage and getting into a healthy relationship.
Sure. So there's this misconception that, in order to heal and in order to be someone who's like, a healthy person inside of a romantic relationship, that you have to like go on this individual shamanic journey and be isolated and be alone. And then when you reach a certain level of healing, then you're ready to be in a relationship. And here's the thing. There are definitely people who need to take a time out from relationships. Like, their baggage is so intense that like they're not ready. But there's a huge spectrum. And at some point, no one is ever fully whole or fully healed. You're never going to be 100% fully whole or fully healed. At some point, you have to be brave and get into the relationship so that you can practice being a better communicator, so that you can practice being more present. And if you can really put in the work and you choose someone who's like really embraces you and wants to do the work too, then the two of you can kind of be like co-healers in this journey together. But it's impossible to do that if you're not responsible for the shit that you bring into the relationship. Accountability is very important.
Accountability is key, obviously, especially in relationships. Yeah. When would I or someone know that it is time? Okay, I have all this baggage. I've healed to as much as I can. when would that time be to go into that new relationship? Or would kind of that person just come along? How would that all work?
Are you thinking of yourself at this moment?
I'm not thinking of myself.
Okay.
I have gone to my personal things in Underdog Talk, and to me, what happened is it just kind of came on its own naturally. But I was more for someone who kind of was on that extreme level of the spectrum where you talked about where they've got to heal.
Right. Um, okay, so wait. So how does someone know when they've healed? Is that what you're saying? Or when they're ready to be in a
Yeah,
relationship?
how does someone know when they've healed when they did have a very tough past with in their relationship, and they're on the level where they can't just kind of heal with someone else yet. They need to heal themselves.
Okay, so sorry. The question is, how do I know if someone is not ready for a relationship?
How do I know if someone is ready for a relationship? I guess after all the
Oh,
bad.
after all the
Yeah.
healing, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, I will just say this generally, like, you're ready for a relationship or you're ready to try out a relationship when you recognize that, like, um, that you are responsible. You're responsible for your behavior when you have an awareness of what your insecurities are, when you have awareness of what your weaknesses are and what your strengths are. Like, you don't want to enter a relationship feeling like you have no strengths as a human being, because then your self-esteem is too low. But you have to have an understanding of, like, this is actually what I bring to the table. This is what makes me wonderful, and these are my weaknesses that I am committed to continue to working on. And then you also know you're ready when you don't have this I mean, we all have this ridiculous idea that, like, there's some perfect person out there who's going to heal you. It's just not going to happen. Like, no one is responsible for your healing other than you. There are people, and I hope, if you're going to be smart, you're going to choose the person who loves you and who accepts you. But, like, you know, just because someone loves you and accepts you does not give you the right to project all your stuff onto them. Like, they're not a rehabilitation center. Like, you have to go in as a partner who's willing to be as healing for yourself and for the others you expect from them. So, like, I think that, a really important prerequisite to getting into a relationship is understanding that, like, no one is responsible for your healing. You're not responsible for someone else's healing. Like, don't try to be the hero in someone else's story. And I think then you have a pretty good chance with those two things.
And kind of piggybacking off that, you're responsible for your own things. And in the 7 reasons, one of my favorite episodes you've done, because it really resonated me, 7 reasons why you're single, and I'll have that episode in the bio. You talk about how it takes two to tango, and that kind of hit me and opened my eyes, because a while ago, I got out of a relationship, and I wasn't putting the blame on myself as much as I should have as well. Is a relationship always going to be both sides? Kind of, is that how it's going to end? Both sides, or is it always kind of, can it come down to just one person in that aspect?
Okay. So there's some nuance to this question. Let's take a very extreme example. Let's say you're in a relationship with someone who is violent and who physically abuses you. And let's just say, you are, the relationship maybe started off really hot. And then then once you're really involved, then there's some physical abuse, some emotional abuse, and whatnot. And let's just say that there isn't, you're not in a culture where you have, how should I say this? Let's just say, actually, let's leave that out. But let's just say you're in a relationship and it's very violent. Clearly, the problem is the violent person.
Yes.
However, to that person who finally is able to hopefully get out of that relationship, their journey, their task is to understand why they got themselves into a relationship like that to begin with.
Yeah, and thank you for clarifying that because it is
Yeah.
really important.
So, yeah. So in that way, you are still the common denominator. So it's not about, oh, 50-50, you're both the problem. It's not a 50-50 split. There's sometimes it's both people just completely messing it up. And sometimes it's one person who's really much more toxic. But what does that say about you if you have a habit of being with people who are abusing you? It means something has to be very much healed inside of you. And that's the responsibility part, which is at some point, if you really want to heal, you're going to have to look in the mirror with help, with some guidance, to look at, what is it inside, like what has to be healed, so that I never find myself in this position ever again. So it still always begins with us.
And it comes to that back to that accountability, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. It's not about blame, it's personal responsibility. Yeah.
I think that's so crucial to just kind of know that going forward, especially for myself as well. Now, you get out of this relationship and you're so good at kind of helping people get back into a new relationship that's healthy. How does one regain trust going into a new relationship? I know I struggle with this, and many people struggle with this. You've had some excellent, quotes, and in your podcast, you talk about it very, very well. How does someone regain that trust going into a new relationship? Do you almost forget the past relationship? How does that all work?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is, I would say it really starts with trusting yourself. I really think that people, they think that they have a hard time trusting others, but really it's a crisis of trusting oneself and trusting their decisions. And I think that so there's that. And then you have to be able to trust that whatever happens, you will overcome it. You will be okay. Like you have to believe in yourself, that you're stronger than you think you are. That said, some of the trust issues, like I worked with someone many, many years ago, and she was in a crisis because all of her exes, one was an ex-spouse, some other men, every single one cheated on her. And so she really, she wanted to be in a new relationship, but every time she was dating and started to see someone, like her jealousy, their ruminating thoughts, because there's a lot of post-traumatic stress that comes with that. But part of helping her was understanding that, like, because she had formed a belief that men cheat.
Yeah.
But what she had to understand was that it wasn't that all men cheat. It was that the men who she was choosing were men who did not have very strong character. And there were a lot of red flags that were presented to her very early on that she ignored. And so understanding that made her look back at her past, at her baggage, and look at it differently. And it also gave her a greater sense of control, which is that, because if you go out into the dating world and your belief is, all men cheat or all women cheat, you're going to feel incredibly out of control, because then you're like, what am I supposed to do? If that's my belief, I can't do anything about it. But if you can understand and look back at your history through a different perspective and see, I actually, I was picking people because that were really low character because, I don't know, my dad was like this or my mom was like, you can kind of trace the origin of these decisions. And so then she got really clear about the kind of man she wanted to be with. And she healed some stuff in herself too that she needed to heal, and finding some self-love, finding some wholeness, even while she's not in a relationship, like being okay, being alone, being okay, waiting for as long as it takes until she meets someone who's really right. And now she's engaged. So so did her trust issues come up? Yes, but not nearly as much as before when she did the work. And then she was empowered to just say, I have this history. I realize that this is happening, but because of that, like, it's really important to me that we have certain boundaries and transparency in conversation, and just really open conversation about what is like appropriate, what is not appropriate, and let's just keep the dialogue open. And
And,
that's how she dealt with it.
wow, it is very hard when you're to be, in those situations where you're waiting for that right person. I myself have been in that situation. It is very hard, and to hear that she, is engaged is such a wonderful, story. And I think it all comes down to that the same thing where you talk about, that idea that all men lie, all women lie, and or kind of relating it to the thing where we talked about, what we think of our weaknesses, where we just focus in on our weakness and kind of hone in on that, and believe that wholeheartedly that we have all these weaknesses when we do have so many strengths, we do have so many things to offer, and kind of
Yes.
eating that all or nothing attitude.
Yes, absolutely. So that's part of healing your baggage too. That's part of the healing process.
Wow. And now, Jillian, before we kind of dive deep into your book or go into your book for the final part, what is your biggest tip for someone who is getting into their first relationship ever? What would your advice be?
Oh, wow. So I would imagine this would be for someone typically much younger.
Yeah,
Um,
a younger situation.
yeah. So first romantic relationship ever.
Yeah.
There'd be a few tips. One is always maintain your life outside of the relationship. So make sure that this person is not supposed to be your only source of love. Keep nurturing your friendships, keep following your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams and your friends and your family, and make this person the only person in your life. That's important. I would say learn how to communicate, have really open, honest communication. You could never communicate enough. Just keep communicating, and make sure you have fun together.
I think that's so key. Now, let me ask you. This is a personal question. When is the
Yeah.
right time to tell someone your baggage? Is there a right or wrong time to tell someone the baggage?
Yeah. So, what the wrong time to tell someone about, and let's give it a different word, like your past and the things and your personal things and the things and your traumas. You shouldn't be doing that in the first few dates. And I'll tell you why, at least the first couple of dates, because number one, they're a stranger. And someone has to kind of earn that information. Number two, it's too much. So here's what the first few dates are for. Seeing if you have rapport, if there's some chemistry. And you want to have really good social skills. And you want to learn about the person. You want to get curious about the person. But if you ask someone, for example, like, tell me about your trauma or tell me about your childhood, that's putting someone on the spot, and you're asking them to be so vulnerable with you, when who are you that they should be vulnerable with you so soon?
Yeah.
It's inappropriate. Instead, you can ask questions like, tell me about like the best trip you ever went on, or tell me about like the last time you like the best movie you ever saw. And actually, these are actually quite profound questions, because what you're inspiring the person to do is tell a story that shares something about who they are. And you don't have to vet them for their baggage right away. You want to know who this person is, because we're not just our baggage. We're so much more than that. And so what I would say is, typically when people start to share more intimate details about the things that they've been through, I think that's when you're starting, and it's hard to know a time frame because everyone moves differently, but it's when you're starting to develop more of like an emotional connection, and you're spending more time together, and there's a little bit more emotional intimacy there, and then you slowly start to share that.
Thank you so much for answering that, Jillian. I myself am really excited about this next topic. Obviously, your new book coming out. It begins with you. Would you mind talking about why you decided to, create a book? What was the process like? And obviously, it's going to be, 20 plus years of all your amazing thoughts poured in there.
Yeah.
But why is that the main? I guess that's the main reason why you decided you wanted to create a book.
Yeah, so the book is titled It Begins With You, The 9 Hard Truths About Love That Will Change Your Life. I really wanted to distill. I was like, what are like the most important things that if I were to, like never be able to write a book again or never be able to share my knowledge again, what are the truths that I would want to leave behind? And I really just felt like the timing was right. It was over 20 years of working with people, my own experiences. I have had so much distance from my own divorce that I could look at that and share about that from a very objective place, not an emotional place. And it just felt like the time was right. And I really wanted to write a book that would change people's lives, regardless of where they were relationally.
And myself will be getting it. I saw it's pre-ordered available. And
Yes, it's available now for pre-order. What's that?
what is the exact date that it's coming out?
So it comes out January 14th.
Okay.
It's available for pre-order now.
Okay.
And yes, and it'll also be on Audible and whatnot. And it's available for pre-order and in many different European countries as well. And yeah, very excited about it.
For first few people to pre-order it, send me a DM. We'll get you a $50 gift card out for you because I think this book is going to be so inspiring, so touching. And now, before we go, Jillian, the floor is yours. Obviously, you have more than a book. You have an amazing social media in your Instagram, and you have your podcast. What is your social media, and where can we find your podcast as well?
Yeah, so you can find my podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's called Jillian on Love. I have social media. It's basically at Jillian Turecki across, all platforms. And I also have a relationship school. This is for women. It's a relationship school for women. Men are welcome to join too, but there's a private little Facebook community that's only for women, and that's called The Conscious Woman. And you can find that on my site, jillianturecki.com. So you just need to know my first and last name and Jillian on Love, and you'll find me.
And all that will be in the bio as well. First 3 people to pre-order this book. I guess, well, I'm going to pre-order it. So I guess there's only, no, I won't count myself. 3 other people to pre-order it as well. I'm pre-ordering it right after this podcast. And guys, don't forget.
Yeah, there'll be special perks for people who pre-order in the coming months for sure.
Oh, well, I'm pre-ordering right after
Yeah.
this. We'll see what those perks are. And
yeah, there'll be some special things coming out.
But
Yeah.
all Jillian stuff will be in the bio. Jillian, thank you again for taking the time to come on the podcast, truly changing the world and inspiring millions. So thank you. Guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Until next time, guys, the Underdog out. Hey, Jillian, thank you so much from the